Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us tonight for this special edition of HR Mentorship Learning Series. And tonight, we'll be looking at the minimum wage, implementation, adjustments, and payroll management. Joining me tonight are two of my colleagues, friends, Ademola Awotuishe, who is an HR professional, someone I've known for quite a bit. We've worked together in different capacities. And I also have Damilola Obidiran, who have also had the privilege and pleasure of working together. We'll be co-panelists, co-discussants tonight, and we'll be sharing knowledge together. Of course, in our usual manner, we'll also take input and comments from members of the participants. If you like to speak, contribute at any point, all you need to do is raise your hands. We recognize you and we give you the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, we will just hit the ground running right away. All right, so we'll move on and look at, what's actually minimum wage. Let me just say here that we have what we call living wage. We also have what we call minimum wage. A living wage is the wage that is viable to thrive or flourish. Living wage means you will be able to be comfortable. The person who is earning this income will be able to live this very, very decent life. But minimum wage means it's like a minimum threshold. Okay, and it is the least amount of money or income that employees should get. Sometimes a minimum wage can be a living wage. Other times, the minimum wage may not necessarily be a living wage. Okay, but a minimum wage is legislated, typically by the government. In some other times, they have different tiers of government that have control or jurisdiction over wages. So, for example, federal government may have jurisdiction over minimum wage for federal workers. States and regions may also have their own unique minimum wage to take into consideration, for example, the cost of living, which may not be the same in the entire federation. In Nigeria, what we practice is that the federal government typically sets up like a tripartite committee, comprising of relevant stakeholders, state governments, organized private sector, labor unions, and other interest groups. And through an iterative process, a minimum wage is arrived. Of course, it then has to go through the National Assembly, and then the presidential assent is given. It is established by the national minimum wage to ensure that workers earn a basic standard of living and to prevent unfair treatment. As of July 18, 2024, the Minister of Information and National Orientation, Mohammed Idris, announced that we are happy to present to the National Assembly the sum of 70,000 naira for consideration. Okay, you will recall that prior to now, the minimum wage was 30,000 naira. Okay, and this has been in practice for 5 years or more. Moving on. Okay, so moving on to the next slide, please. The minimum wage that has expired is Act 2019. Okay, and there are different aspects to it. And in the minimum wage that just expired, it identified, for example, some types of exemptions. For example, maybe people who are working on part-time basis may not, so to speak, be qualified to earn minimum wage, or people who earn commission or piece rates, or establishments or organizations that employ less than 25 persons, workers in seasonal employment, such as agriculture, or persons employed in a vessel or aircraft to which the laws regulating merchant shipping or civil aviation apply. So these categories of people, the minimum wage may not apply to them. That does not mean that at the end of the day, their income may not be above and beyond minimum wage. But because of the peculiarities, so for example, somebody on part-time basis may be working for multiple stakeholders. So because you are earning income from different sources, at the end of the day, you don't want to tie a minimum wage to one type of employer in that context because you have multiple employers. So that's the wisdom and the reasoning behind not insisting that people in part-time employment should earn minimum wage from one singular source. All right. Of course, once it is gazetted, the new minimum wage, we will have full clarity on the types of exemptions that will apply in this 2024 minimum wage. We've had, for example, our Senate President, Godswill Akpabio, saying that, minimum wage applies to everybody, your domestic worker, your driver, and so on and so forth. But one thing is most likely going to be, we are confident that there will be some exemptions and they will be clearly stated. And I don't see the exemptions being significantly far from the current exemptions that we already have. Again, people on part-time basis, people who are on commission or piece rates, people, establishments with employees less than 25 persons, workers in seasonal employment such as agriculture. Of course, when it comes to aircraft or maritime, they have their own special rates and international laws that guide the kind of payments and emoluments, that surrounds this. Now, moving on to the next slide. Okay, so just that was just to provide an overview of the current minimum wage regime that we have exited from or we are exiting from. Prior to now, the minimum wage legislation determined that every 5 years, the wages will be reviewed every 5 years. However, in this new regime, the 2024 minimum wage, part of the concession by the government is that the review will be now every 3 years. So which means in 3 years' time or shortly before then, conversations will begin again with respect to what the minimum wage should be. Should it still be 70,000 naira? Will it rise to 100, 150, and so on and so forth? Again, the tripartite committee comprising of the Minister of State for Labor and Employment, okay, the governor of Niger State representing the governors, labor leaders, private sector operators, 4 from National Salary, Income and Wages Commission, among others, reviewed the minimum wage. They even had public sitting where different interest groups submitted their proposals to the various organs. So, for example, NECA was like the core body that represented the organized private sector, and all the various organs in NECA sent in their submissions, consideration, and they had to look at a lot of factors. Now, based on the tripartite committee on the new minimum wage, they have identified categories of workers who are exempt from receiving the new minimum wage. And the criteria for exemption include nano and micro businesses. In other words, businesses with less than 10 employees. Again, nano businesses are business managed by 1 to 3 persons with capital below 50,000 naira. Also, excluded are startups and businesses with less than 50 million revenue per quarter or 200 million revenue per annum. Then organizations with less than 10 staff or those not more than 3 years in existence. Okay. Then industries with staff remuneration regulated by other acts of the National Assembly or any business which the Minister of Labor and Employment or the Executive Chairman of the National Salaries, Income, Wages finds to be reasonably justified to be waived. So in some instances, the organization may need to write to the minister for a waiver or consideration for a waiver. Again, Workers on seasonal employment, such as agri farmlands, vessels, and aircraft, who defer to laws that guide merchant shipping or civil aviation applies. Now, moving on, ladies and gentlemen, we'll move on to possible implementation, and I'll invite my colleague Ademola Awotuishi to please take over from here. Over to you, Ademola.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Adeosho. So moving forward from the discussion we've had, we are looking at the implementation, considering that there's the new minimum wage is now set at 70,000. How do we implement within our respective organizations? How do we ensure that, yes, we are complying to what the new regulation? So the first thing would be to review our current payroll. Review our current payroll involves you reviewing the list. You have employees who currently earn below the minimum wage, and instances you could have office assistant, majorly your junior staff. It depends on your grade levels within your organization, either your office assistant, drivers, janitors, and the likes. Review it and also run a possible impact. If you increase their wages, if you increase it from their current earnings to 70,000, what will be the financial application to you? And the next step will be to adjust your payroll system. We are adjusting your payroll system, and it's expected that it's either you used an automated process or maybe you use an Excel, but ensure that, yes, whatever update you are making reflect with the new minimum wage of 17,000 naira. You would also have to notify your employees, inform the employees, and because of the information going on, employees must have been reaching out to HR. Oh, this immediately the update was made July 18th. Some employees walk to HR. Oh, is my salary going to be reviewed immediately in compliance with the minimum wage? So you need to communicate with the employee. So it means that you need to reissue a revised of a salary review letter indicating the new salary and also applicable benefits. Moving on from that, yes, you update the employment contract, and also you have to engage your managers to ensure that, yes, you manage compliance in ensuring that you comply with labor law. And following this recent update, Ministry of Labor would also work towards ensuring compliance. If an organization has less than 10 staff and has been existent for over 5 years, the organization has to comply, and to avoid sanctions and the likes. Although, based on the new policy, is subject to discussion because, for instance, some state governments might not be able to afford this. But for private organizations, looking at what has been clearly spelled out, if you won't be able to afford that, you need to write to the Ministry of Labor and Employment, maybe asking for a waiver and also business justification why you cannot accommodate such increase at that point in time. And because of the plan to review the minimum wage in 3 years' time, so the question every HR professional is to ask is, what are the likely decision? What are the likely percentage increase to come in the next 3 years? And what is the projected consumer price index? What will be the projected inflation rates for you to plan appropriately, so that in 3 years' time, you won't any form of adjustment, the impact will be minimal. At the time when the tripartite committee, majorly the National Labour Congress, the initial request was for over 400,000 and the likes. That was the asking price, which was unrealistic. Because it's not possible to accept that. But since 70,000 naira is being brought forward, so that means you also need to project. Maybe you can have a phased approach on what you'll be doing in a few years down the line. Okay. So in respect to adjustment for employees now, employees who currently earn above the minimum wage, and also employees who currently earn below the minimum wage. Now, because every organization, it depends if you have a clearly defined salary structure, then you can do a bit of simulation to ensure that, yes, percentage increase across grade levels, to ensure that, yes, every employee enjoys some level of benefits. Because following this wage increase, it's going to be a ripple effect. It means that the prices of goods and services in the market would increase. And so what would be the reaction, or what would be the how would the organization come in to ensure that yes, employees are in turn satisfied, and also to avoid a possible job switch in the organization? So the first task would be to conduct a wage analysis. Review your current salary scale. If you don't have a salary scale, you can also review your current payroll, from the least earning staff to the highest earning staff. From the least earning staff, what is the percentage increase, or what is the difference, to ensure that yes, you comply with it? And if you are going to do that, what will be the percentage increase? Employees currently earn 30,000 naira. What is the percentage increase to move the employee from 30,000 naira to 70,000 naira? Currently at that rate, that is 133.3%. Now you ask yourself, based on that approach, can you increase all employees' salary at a rate of 133.3%? It is not possible. Well, it depends on the financial capability of the organization. And at this point in time, whereby companies at this point are struggling to ensure that yes, businesses are down at this moment in Nigeria, companies' profits, middling profits, multinationals are declaring loss, Nestle and the rest, why you have some multinationals leaving the country because of the economic policies and also the unfavorable conditions. So you need to understand, if you decide to increase at this point in time, what would be the likely increase? Do you want to increase by 10%, or maybe you want to increase by 150% of the minimum wage? Once you've done that, you need to implement a pay band. It is mostly advisable to have a pay band or a salary structure. The essence of a pay band is to further guide you. And the popular band system we have the broad banded system, whereby we have pay ranges. You have the minimum to the maximum, minimum, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5. It depends on what you have. What that does is it gives an employer flexibility on where to place an employee, or when there are adjustments of this nature. So it is advisable that when you implement your pay band, be futuristic, looking at what will be the likely impact in the next 3 years. Bear in mind that the salary, there's going to be another review, and immediately this is gazetted. That means come 3 years, government needs to ensure that yes, there's a new minimum wage. So ensure that your pay band reflects that. But if you do not have that, based on your current payroll you can design some or engage in the services of HR professionals, consultants who help you with that. Now, because this is focusing on, your focus is on your total compensation. Now, there are different questions flying around. Oh, this minimum wage, does it impact the gross salary? Does it impact the net salary? You need to ensure that. So at the end of the day, employee is interested in, if we conduct a survey now, every employee, they're interested in their take-home pay, not interested in other deductions. So it is advisable that when you're designing your pay band, ensure that yes, that your pay band reflects the 70,000 as the net salary. And if you want to do your the 70,000 to be gross salary, you need to engage with your employees and tell them reasons why you are the new minimum wage is set at the gross salary. So whatever comes, you tell them that's the gross, and after deductions, it depends on the contract agreement, the nature of contract. If the employee if the employee is subject to statutory deductions, for instance, tax is compulsory. But if you have instances like pension, then you need to let the employee know that what you'll be receiving, your gross salary is 70,000 and the rest. So this time around as well, because of this new minimum wage, it means that employers, HR, will need to be creative in designing performance-based bonus system, whereby you recognize salary review will be based on actual performance of employees. That's why some organizations would also, at the point of implementing this, would also implement it with a merit increase. Now, because you have an employee who currently earns 30,000 naira, statutorily, you have to comply to increase it to 70,000. But rather than leave it at 70,000 and also distinguish between performing employees and non-performing employees. Before you get to 70,000, you can just make a difference. This is where you do a bit of simulation on what, okay, if performing employees, rather than earn 70,000, they get 80,000. In quote, it depends on your affordability. And also when you're doing this simulation as well, you need to be sure that yes, you need to be sure that yes, the impact on your wage bill, you don't want to go overboard, because at the end of the day, your management will be asking questions. The board will also be asking questions regarding that. So you can introduce a skill-based pay, a performance-based pay to recognize performing employees. That way, you distinguish between performing employees and non-performing employees. You can also have to enhance career development opportunities. So because of the possibility, if an employee is not well paid, and also because of the ripple effect of the new minimum wage on increase in prices of goods and services, employees will be willing to switch jobs to go to your competitors. Now, this time around, further slide, we will discuss on how the impact of your competitors could also affect your critical talent in the organization. So this time around, your talent team, your learning and development team could also bring out various skills, various training programs that employees can also take up. Employees as individuals as well, in a bid to also increase your earning capacity, you can also take additional certification. So you can also improve your bargaining power with your prospective employer. Okay, and while doing that, I touched a base on this as well. You need to communicate transparently. Because the new minimum wage is coming at the second half of the year, you need to discuss with your employee on the implementation plan. Number one, are you willing to implement immediately? Number two, if you cannot implement immediately, what is the likely step? What is the plan? Because you need to comply. And the unfortunate part, would also discuss that much later, the ripple effect would also lead to loss of jobs, because employers who are struggling to make profit at this point in time, there's a difference between revenue and profits. If employers currently are struggling to make profits, and because you cannot transfer the increase in cost of goods and services to your customers, because certainly customers will push back and go to so let's assume you are in the FMCG. Because of this new development, because your profit margin is low, rather than transfer the possible increase in price to your customers, it could lead to right sizing. And at this point in time, so this will be the potential impact, the negative impact that this minimum wage would cause. And so you need to communicate to your employees, what approach are you taking? Oh, okay, we'll take it by grade levels. From grade level 1 to 3 would enjoy the increase at this point in time, then subsequently, or maybe your focus is, okay, who are the least paid? They are currently at 30,000. Simply move them to 70,000 naira. And that's it. And regarding gradual implementation, because of the budget constraints, we are already in the second half of the year, meaning your 2024 budget is up and running. And it depends on your financial year. Every organization have their financial year depending on the financials. So some, their budget plan is from January to December. Their financial is from January to December. That's calendar year. While some is from June to May, some is from October, and some are just completing it. So for those that are just into the second half of their budget, it means that at the beginning of the year, at the initiation stage, provision was not made for this increase. Maybe the provision that was made for a salary increase could just be a general salary review. Now, the big question is, if a salary review had been done earlier in the year, or maybe a salary review was done last year due to the removal of fuel subsidy, it now reached to, okay, and Dr. Adeosun, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly chime in here. So, you are saying, what you are saying right now is that budgetary provisions. Now, this is where, as HR professionals and management practitioners, we must be on top of our game. What do I mean? The current minimum wage expired this year. it was set into motion 5 years ago. So which means the budget for this year, we should all have been fully aware that there was going to be a minimum wage review. However, the challenge or question will be to what extent? So in the real sense of it, all organizations should have made some provision for a wage review this year. However, I agree that, for example, you may have anticipated a 50% wage review, and then the government did whatever percentage they did. Again, if we made that mistake, it's okay. But in 3 years' time, this new minimum wage is going to expire. So we shouldn't fall into that trap that in 3 years' time, we will not make some budgetary provision for the minimum wage. I just wanted to chime that in. Over to you, Ademola.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Yeah, so the next action will be to regularly review and adjust your pay structure. Bear in mind that you have 3 years to do another salary review, so you regularly review your structure to ensure that yes, it's aligned. Okay, now looking at the payroll management aspect, and this is where the real work comes into play, because different questions have been coming up that, oh, how do we implement the new minimum wage? And kudos to other HR professionals who has also written 1 or 2 articles regarding the approach that can be implemented. Although there are some funny numbers we've seen going around as well. Someone did a simulation, a situation whereby someone currently earns 200,000. At the end of the day, the salary is increased for over 400,000. But we need to be mindful. It's not just about throwing numbers, but also looking at what will be the likely impact to the business. And the key pointer for this will be the key important aspect for payroll management in implementing the minimum wage is the COLA adjustment. And the reason why the COLA adjustment is the best is because it involves analyzing of data and also using inflationary data to determine what the new minimum wage or what the new salary will be across the organization. It looks at the inflationary trend, what is the increase in prices of goods and services and the rest, and also a review of calculating it and what the impact will be on the cost of living. When gathering your data, the most reliable data at this point in time is your Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, because year on year, monthly, they give you the average consumer price index. And it's the consumer price index that you use in determining what will be the applicable rate. So that gives you an idea of, okay, this is the general prices of goods and services in the market. If the general price of goods is at this percentage, okay, it's safe to say that as a cushion within the organization, we recommend this rate. But when you are recommending the rate as well, you look at the various indices in your organization, your financial plans. That's where your finance teams comes into play. Your budget, can you implement it? Can you take that increase at that point? So once you've done that, then you can adjust your salary to implement the change. Okay, so this is the table below. So a review of the data from 2020 to June 2024. This shows the consumer price index from 2020 to 2024. The CPI for 2020 is 15.75. That's the average increase across the year. Now you would notice it has been progressive, and currently, as of June, we are currently at 34.19, even though the data for July 2022, 2024 is not yet. So this is the inflationary rates as of this period. And to determine your COLA is a review of what is the average increase for the current year minus the average increase for the previous year or the preceding year. So with that, it gives you an idea on how best it also gives you an idea on the prevailing rate in which you can increase your salary. It does not mean that you cannot go above that, but it gives you a systematic approach on how you can adjust your payroll. So for instance, in 2022, the year-on-year percentage change is 31.546. In 2021, we experienced a bit of stability. That's why you have 0.76. And to arrive at these numbers is you simply do, as I've explained, the current year minus the previous year divided by the base year. So for this part, you do 15.63 minus 15.75 divided by 15.75. It gives you the year-on-year percentage change. So for 2022, it rose to 36.53, and current last year is 35.52. So because we don't have, at this moment, we don't have the, so currently looking at the inflationary rates, we've simply done the average of the inflationary rate from January to June. The average is currently at 32.67. This does not mean that it cannot increase for July, August, September, and the rest. So there's a possibility that based on this new minimum wage, the inflation is going to increase. Now, but looking at this currently, if you decide to make any form of adjustment, you can propose a 22.67% increase. That in itself, when you're presenting it to management or when you're presenting to your board, it shows you're coming from the perspective or perception based on the inflationary rates. But if we choose to go through, the minimum wage is 30,000, the minimum wage, the previous minimum is 30,000 and the new wage is 70,000. That is 133%. If the organization can accommodate it, all well and good. And it cannot, then you can choose a better approach in dealing with the increase. Okay, so this is just a simulation. And this is also, the reason why I have this is just to enhance your understanding when should you decide to apply it in your respective organization. It is assumed that we have a grade level 1 to 14, and from this grade level is assistant 1, assistant 2. It depends on what you have in your organization. Assistant 1 to 3. So it's assumed that the current monthly salary is at 50,000 to 1,050,000 naira. It means that based on the minimum wage, assistant 1 and 2 currently earn below the minimum wage. For some of your organizations, your employees currently earn above the minimum wage, the new minimum wage. You can decide to do a salary review, and you can also decide, well, since they earn above the minimum wage, let me just do a marginal percentage increase because of the possible increase. But if you can decide, but for organizations whereby their employees earn below, you can do a. So from what we've done is, because assistant 1 is currently earn 50,000 naira, the minimum wage is set at 70,000 because that is what is expected to be the minimum salary. But what we've simply done, the impact on this, because his previous salary is 50,000, led to a percentage increase of 40,000 naira. So for some organization, they would have a varying rate. So what do I mean by varying rate? That rather than do a one-size-fits-all approach, to have a flat rate across the organization, irrespective of your grade level, you will receive this value. But with what we have, so assistant 1, because it's far below the minimum wage, it gets a 40% increase. So from here, assistant 1 gets a 40% increase. Assistant 2 gets 33% increase. Officer 1 to get 25% increase. So what's the reason for this is because because this is simulation, you also need to know what is the because of the salaries of the employees and also the possible impact to an employee. Because these employees are in lower grade levels, if you apply, you cannot apply a 40, should you decide to apply a 40%, imagine if you decide to apply a 40% increase, the impact is going to have per grade level differs. Look at this person now, the senior manager, the monthly salary is currently at 150. But with the impact, with the 20% increase, look at the percentage difference. It shows 20 to 10,000. So sometimes the lower grade levels get higher percentage and it progresses. Now, let's look at method 2. This is looking at, okay, if we decide to apply a fixed rate, bear in mind that this assistant 1, the minimum, this is still using the same data we have here. Assistant 1 currently earn 50,000 naira. The minimum wage is set at 70,000 naira. Then it gets a 70%. Assistant 2 is currently at 60,000 naira. But because we want to have a flat rate, whereby across all the grade levels, they get a 20% increase. Now, the reason why we're doing this is because our primary focus is on this assistant 1. And because we don't want other grade levels to be left out, we decide to do a percentage, 20% increase. But the impact among other grade levels will be less felt. This person, the difference, the monthly difference is 12,000 naira, meaning after other deductions, the impact it could be to 10,000 naira or 8,000 naira. But look at higher grade level. The other method would be to apply the increase based on the consumer price index, based on the rate we got with 32.67. But the most important thing is when you are doing your simulation, you need to know where your critical mass is. By critical mass, now because majority, so from the entry level or from the junior grade level, there's a possibility that majority of your employees will be on this grade level. So you can decide to increase your percentage. You can decide to give higher percentages to the lower grade levels than due to the financial impact it's going to have. But for higher grade levels, so as it grows, as you go higher, that means the number of employees on each of these grade level will differ. The number of managers you would have. So most often they even said that the ratio between your managers should be, some organization will say 10 employees to 1 manager and the rest. I forgot, I'm not sure I'm quoting that right, but it's just to tell you that as you move through the ladder, the number of employees in lower grade level is more than the higher grade level. 2, where do you have your critical talents? And because we are in the war for talents, you need to know where your critical talents are. And you don't want a situation whereby if you do not react and your critical talent varies. In the year 2020, the critical talent in quotes used to be the IT guys, the tech guys, because of the Japan syndrome. But now the critical talents have moved to other departments. Now you need to ask yourself, if I'm implementing this change, how do I focus on these categories of employees? For some organizations, they are clearly defined. For some organizations, they maintain two different salary scale. One salary scale for your regular employees, one salary scale for your critical talent employees, and sometimes they are regarded as your strategic, in quote, strategic salary scale. Strategic salary scale is your critical talent. You want to ensure that, yes, they are comfortable and they are not thinking of the possibility to exit the firm. Because when they exit the firm, you think about the financial impact it's going to cost. Not only the financial impact, the period at which an employee would need to settle on the organization differs. So when you're designing this, you need to focus on critical talent. The other part you need to also look into is your compensation philosophy. So imagine if you're in the FMCG, your compensation philosophy is to be the market leader. It means that based on this new increase, you also need to increase you also need to do a salary review to ensure that, yes, you remain competitive. If you don't do that, it means that your competitors will catch up to you. And that means invariably you will lose your market power. And most often, to become a market leader, most organizations, should you decide to lead the market, that means most organizations fall into that category. So in doing that, you need to ensure you review. And also within the industry you operate, what is the reaction? I know at this point in time, it's difficult to conduct a survey to know, okay, what adjustments have been made. That could be done much later in the year or next year. But at this point in time, grapevine, gossips, and the rest, oh, what percentage increase is your company doing? You can reach out, you could reach out to friends of friends. What are they doing at this point in time? Does your organization want to do 10% increase? Does the organization want to do 20% increase? So you need to understand the industry reaction as well, because if you decide not to react, it could be costly. You could lose your employees. Now, the other part also, why doing your simulation? And because every employee would always want more salary, you need to keep an eye on your wage bill. Looking at your current salary and your proposed salary based on the adjustments. If your wage bill will shoot up to 87%, now the question you might have to ask yourself, that's just a projection, though maybe it increases by 30% or 40%, whichever the case might be. The question is, what is your revenue? Remember, you have OPEX, operational expenses, which also covers, if you engage with your finance team, if you look at the percentage OPEX takes, because you definitely need to, for instance, the various ones you have, employees need to drink, need to get water. That's, you have your dispenser, employees need to print, employees need to use ink, employees need to commute. All those costs would also impact on your profits. So you also need to, so while you're having your, oh, nice to have, oh, organization A has increased to 30%. Can you afford to do it? And when you decide to go ahead with it, what will be the impact? Because you cannot, at the end of the day, overshoot your budget. And this also brings us to our budget. We already said that now some organizations already made provision for this increase, but some did not make provision for this increase. The budget has been signed. But in such instance, that's when provisional budget comes into play, and that's the supplementary budget. Supplementary budget is to cater for unforeseen circumstance if you've not made plans for it. You get approval from the board and also a justification on the need to increase the salary, on the need to react to the new minimum wage. These are the critical points you need to note. Then the third point is increase based on the consumer price index. Recall that based on our simulation, a review of the data, we have, instead of using, because to calculate your consumer, your year-on-year percentage increase, which is the COLA, is to do the average of the year less the previous year to arrive at the rate. But what we've simply done is to do an average of the inflationary rate from January to June. It's currently at 22.67. Now you ask yourself, if you decide to apply a 32.7 increase across the organization. Now, looking at the same example we gave, whereby assistant one, rather than subject it to further increase, and also you don't want to increase assistant one's salary, so it won't overlap into assistant two. Although when you're designing your pay band system, there's something called pay overlap, which is acceptable, but sometimes there's a limit to which a pay overlap can occur. So for certain grade level, pay overlap is acceptable, but for some it is not. So you don't want a situation whereby, and that's where you oftentimes prevent, you don't want an assistant 3 earning more than officer 1. Now, for instance, looking at this increase, this person is currently at 70,000. If we decide to increase this salary beyond 40%, this person could earn more than this. Although based on experience, I don't think assistant 2 would be the line manager for assistant 1. I don't think so, because when job evaluations are done, certainly the officer 1 should be the reporting line. So, but in such instance, you can accommodate it for second grade level, because it depends on the years of experience required, or what are the technical skills required to be moved into, to be into that grade level. So these are the possible options when you want to project or propose the likely salary increase. Yes, and we have to include this because of this from other professionals who suggested other options in calculating the new based on the new minimum wage. Now, because of look at the current minimum wage is set at 30,000 naira, and because this an employee current salary is 200,000 naira, the minimum wage is 70,000 naira. If the difference, the percentage increase from 30,000 to 70,000 is 133.3%. So the recommendation is, this person that currently earn 200,000, it should be moved to 466,000 naira. That's a percentage increase of 133, and also a pay difference, pay increase of 266,000. Imagine if you have an assumption, if you have a small size organization, so let's assume you have 50 employees. Can you afford to do 133.3% at this point in time? I don't think so. So these are other methods as well. But our recommendation is, it is better to adopt the COLA approach, because it gives room for transparency and also engagement with management that, okay, this is the basis for the increase. Beyond that, it also gives the employee, the reason for it. Also enhances transparency that, okay, these are what informed the percentage increase. Now, going further is looking at what are the various considerations we need to bear in mind when calculating or when computing the minimum wage. The key pointer is, because the consumer price index varies across states, varies depending on state. So the inflationary rate for Lagos might be different from other states. For some people in other, let's assume the Southwest, if you have friends there, they often tell you that things are cheaper in Lagos State compared to other states. And that will tell you that should they decide so the inflationary rate for those states, so you don't need to apply a one-size-fits-all approach. If you have some employees in upcountry, maybe in Enugu State, or any parts in Southeast, or any part in Northeast, so you need to bear in mind, should you decide that, okay, employees in those locations will get this rate, while the employees in this location will get this rate, because their purchasing power differs. For some states, immediately the minimum wage was increased, some state governors were already saying that we cannot pay this. The 30,000 naira we are owing salaries, we still not be able to pay 30,000 naira. Now you've increased it to 70,000 naira. Well, that's for government, that's for public sector. But for private sector, you just come up with creative ways on how to ensure that, yes, we're able to ensure compliance. And state governments who are unable to apply because of their low internally generated revenue. If you look at internally generated revenue for Lagos State, for instance, is different from the internal generated revenue for some states. For instance, states without the presence of multinational companies, and maybe majority of what they have, you cannot compare their earnings. When you compare their financial statement, you will notice that even though some of them get federal government allocation, but it's not the same thing compared to the internal generated revenue. So those are the possible considerations and further discussion. So the possible solution will be that you need to set 70,000 as your baseline. This does not mean that the least any employee organization will be 70,000 naira. You could say that, the least any employee organization will be 90,000. For some organizations, they've moved beyond this. The least any earner in the organization could be it could be someone who earn 150,000. It could be an office assistant, or whatever role, or whatever employment capacity the person was employed. You could also adopt a phased approach that maybe, okay, let's focus on those who are impacted, that is, those who earn below the minimum wage. Let us increase their salary now, and those who already earn above there will increase their salaries later. This is where engagement comes in. As HR professionals, we need to engage with our employees, engage with our stakeholders, let them see reason that yes, we are aware of what is expected of us, and this is the approach we'll be taking. So COLA adjustment for all grade level due to likely increase. I already spoke about this. If you decide to have a flat increase across the grade level, but it is also important that you come up with COLA indices for specific locations, because what is, as I've explained, what is applicable in certain locations might not be applicable in other locations. Now, speaking to further strategies that can be adopted, this is we have a lot of them, and most often would be restructuring and cost management. Or what is the way forward? We cannot continue to incur this significant cost in the business. What do we need to do? It might lead to restructuring, and some organizations would prefer to outsource some roles. Now, there are some questions that will be going on. Do we also increase the minimum wage for outsourced employees? That would involve internal deliberations with your management. Because while some organizations are beginning to, rather than have outsourced employees, it could be, let's say, a contractual type of employment, maybe on a part-time basis. In quotes, I'm not saying this should be our reaction, but this is just possible approach organization might want to do in restructuring costs. So let's assume initially we have an office assistant whose responsibility is to maybe clean the office and the likes, and is on full salary. I mean, he receives salary month on month. But because of this new change, you can decide to outsource the role and tell the person, okay, so this time around, you are engaging with the contractor. I don't care how much you pay, but this will be my service fee for this service. This will be what I'll be paying as professional fee for this service. So reach an agreement. Now, it now depends on the employer of the other person on what approach he or she is going to take to ensure that, yes, but this individual works optimally. So organization might have to resort to outsourcing, or maybe consulting, or engage in the service of independent consultants. Oh, you can come up to do this, I pay you, rather than have you fully employed. Although some organizations are already doing that. So maybe this would further they'll come up with better strategies on the approach that will be taken. You need to further ensure that how can you generate more revenue. Now, this is a pain point, because with the way the prices of goods and services are increasing, if you decide to push it onto your customers, your customer will decide to switch to another product. I remember some years back, apologies if anybody works with the organization. I remember some years back, because of the level of competition between Pepsi and Coca-Cola, when Biggie Cola came, and I remember at that point, Pepsi and Coca-Cola increased the price of a bottle of Coke or a bottle of pep drink. And when cola break into the market, customers switch to Biggie Cola. So it means that if you decide to transfer the cost to your customers, you should also expect a reaction from your customer. So organization might have to look for other ways to diversify their revenue streams to ensure that, yes, they make new, they get revenue, explore new markets. Now, several bottling companies is now into sanitizer. They are now into hand wash, no more focusing on bottling drinks and the right. So we need to diversify and see what better approaches to ensure that, yes, our business continue to. Hello, please, am I still audible?
Yes. Well, we are together.
Oh, okay, thank you. Something came up on my screen. Okay, the other part would also be further strategy is to ensure employee engagement. You need to engage your employees on the possible impact of the new minimum wage. If you can afford it, fine. And this is speaking to organizations whose current employees who currently earn below the minimum wage. You need to engage with your employees. Oh, I won't be able to apply this new minimum wage because we have not made provision for it. But you can make, maybe in the next 2 months or maybe possible next year with your justification on why you want to do it. And you could also, in a bit to reduce the burden on your employer, you could have a flexible work arrangement. Rather than, and I think majority of organizations are doing that, whereby you have the hybrid work model whereby employees can work for a few days in the office and work from home. This is also to reduce the financial burden on the employee. It should be open to negotiation and collaboration. So this time as HR professionals, you need to negotiate and also collaborate with other HR representatives, other HR professionals in other industries, what is being done in your organization so that I can also implement. Because in quotes, you don't want to lose your talent. And imagine if an HOD is coming to you, because you did not review this salary, this employee is exiting. Remember, they pay to recruit, they pay to fill certain roles. There are some difficult to fill roles in the organization. You won't be willing, you don't want to lose such employees. And other option would be to engage with the government and also get subsidy.
Ademola.
Hi, Deborah.
Yeah.
Deborah, please.
Okay, thank you very much. So in addition to employee engagement and in addition to non-monetary benefits, so just like Ademola has said, typically a lot of people may not be able to afford this new minimum wage and be able to apply it across all the grade levels in their company. But I think one of the emphasis that we should take away from this session is that we need to start looking at other employee engagement means, and then we can even go ahead to expand our benefits in kind. What are the different benefits in kind that we have? We can expand the offerings of these benefits in kind. We can expand the offerings of the different benefits that we currently offer our employees. By doing that, we tend not to actually increase our wage bill as much as when we're actually increasing the gross salary of people. A lot of persons have asked questions about taxes. A lot of persons have asked questions about the total cost of employment. All of these things definitely are going to be impacted when we do an increase on the gross salaries of our employees. But if we can look at, if you currently are offering a benefit in kind of 100,000 naira, of HMO of 100,000 naira, if you increase your service offerings to your employees by maybe 20,000 or 50,000, and to be honest, some of these things they get better with negotiations. When you do negotiations, when you have large number of employees, when you're doing these offerings, your negotiations actually reduce your cost to some extent. By the time you compare the cost increase on your benefits in kind to the actual increase to the monthly salary or to the monthly gross, you find out that the differences may not be so much. So you can look at all these things to actually use to encourage people. Then we talked about flexible working hours, remote work options. I know organizations tend not to want to adopt these things. They tend to, or even hybrid options, they tend to shy away from these things or run away from them because I don't know if there are senior persons on this call, but typically people tend to run away from these things because of monitoring and because of productivity. But I believe that looking at how we've transitioned from 2020 up until now, these are options that really would work for us. These are options that we can actually use. So if you currently are not offering that to your employees, you can actually include that. And if you're offering it on a 1 day a week, 2 days a week, you can actually increase, because to be honest, people need support. People need support right now, and you need to be able to provide these things. Then we talked about professional development. So offering training programs, development opportunities. One of the things that a lot of companies currently do not have is a defined career growth path. Sometimes even as HR professionals, we struggle with how is my growth path or how is my career path going to be in this organization. Yes, please go ahead. Yes, sir.
Adele Amosun would like to chime in. Of course, you will continue after
Yes.
Adele Amosun.
Yes.
You have the floor, please. Adele, please speak.
Okay, so I'm not sure this was mentioned, but one of the strategies about when you're increasing the salaries, right, is not to increase everything at once. Number one, one of the things I like to always advise, comp and bend people is while the HR department would make those recommendations, it's always good to check with the guys who are custodians of the company purse, which is usually your finance team. So don't work in isolation. Always remember to put your finance team, to carry your finance team along. The finance team will also, because there's something called amortization, which is basically spreading across, a period of time, how you allot funds to the organization. So while you want to do the immediate changes to, those who are scaling from below the current minimum wage to the new minimum wage, for the other cadres in the organization, you can decide to defer, the increases to a later date. At least that way you can communicate. One of the things is communicate it. Oh, we're going to do an increase across board. However, from cadres, this to this will be done immediately. The next set of cadres will be done maybe in another 3 months, in another 6 months, right? Because you also want to give the organization enough time, right, to make availability funds that will cover your comp and bend for a certain period. I yield the mic.
All right, thank you very much. So I think that more or less sums up a huge part of what we've been saying actually. So it's not about immediate implementation for everybody, but primarily identifying the persons who are below who are currently earning below the minimum wage. If you can apply it, you can actually do that immediately for them, and then for the other cadres, you can actually cascade it over the next couple of months or even over a year. However, I think we'll still come to that point, which brings us to negotiation and collaboration and open communication. You have to have open and honest conversations with your employees. And that stems from the fact that you have done your simulations, you have identified the people that are below the cadre, you have identified how much it's going to cost the company if they were to implement what's it called now? If they were to implement the minimum wage across board, or if they were to implement an increase across board, just like Demola has said, really, it's just about identifying what percentage the company can actually afford, and most importantly, the company can sustain. So it's not just even about affording it for this month or for this year, but being able to sustain it for another 2-3 years. Okay, so having open, honest conversations, be honest about your conversations. Be honest with the management about your conversations. Work with your finance team to actually identify the cost implication for your company, and be honest with your employees. Be straightforward with your employees. I believe employees appreciate when when as HR professionals, we're honest with them. Are you going to have people that are going to kick back? Definitely yes. Are you going to have people who are cantankerous? Definitely yes. But you should also be able to identify how to manage these people, identify those people and manage those people, but be able to work with every other person. Be honest. Oh, we cannot implement it. Don't make promises that you cannot fulfill. We were in a session recently and somebody was saying something about how they did a pay increase when subsidy was removed for fuel, and they did a pay increase in a particular month, and they paid that month only for the following months. The company could not afford to pay, and they had to go back to their previous salary all over again. So which didn't make any sense. So be honest with your employees. Then union negotiations. So for people who are unionized, for companies who are unionized, if applicable, negotiate with your labor unions to reach an agreement that balances with the organization's financial state or with the organization's financial capacity. You should be able to identify, have conversations with them, be straightforward, and be proactive in your conversation. Don't wait for them to reach out to you, even though some of them already are, but be able to reach out to them first and have proper conversations. Just like Demola has been saying all this while, have your data, have your simulations already, and have this conversation. And just like Derenle said, the finance team, let them be able to advise you on the cost implication for the organization. Then innovative compensation strategies, which includes profit sharing. So one of the things that we are also emphasizing in this session is that it's not just about, don't just say, okay, I cannot implement minimum wage, I cannot implement salary increase across board for everybody. So everybody go back and continue earning what you are earning, and that's the end of it. No, there are also ways we can actually drive performance, because just like Demola has said, you also have to be able to grow the business, diversifying the market, diversifying your products and services. They're very critical. They're very critical things that will actually grow your revenue. So even if you are deferring increase for another 1 year, what are you banking on for that 1 year? The economic situation may improve and it may not improve. So what's the backup plan that you actually have? So, and one of the ways to do that is to drive the performance of the employees. When you drive performance of employees, you drive performance of the organization. So using things like profit sharing, you tend to hear people say things like, or companies say things like, we didn't make profit this year, so we're not going to do profit sharing. Sometimes when you make profit in a particular year, you should have a reserve for the next year or for the next 2 years of what your profit sharing is going to be. So it's just a way of encouraging employees. But if your current company currently does not have that, you should use that. You should use that strategy. You do an employee engagement session to drive that, to say that, oh, based on what we're currently earning as a company, or based on our revenue as a company, this is what employees are going to earn. So you should use that to actually drive your employees. Then incremental wage increases, phased implementation. I think we talked about that already. I don't want to go over that again. Then performance-based increases. This is very critical, which is similar to profit sharing. So instead of just focusing on, we've talked about minimum wage increase, we've talked about applying the consumer price index, we've talked about COLA, we've talked about all these things, and they are literally just plug and play for a lot of us. However, how about having strategies where you're basing people's increases based on their performance? So if somebody has a particular rating, a 5 out of 5, what's the person's pay, or what's the person's percentage increase going to be? Have that defined. If somebody has a 4 out of 5, what's the percentage increase for that person going to be? Have that defined so that you can actually apply that and use that and communicate it, and engage people, explain these things. Sometimes we find out that a lot of companies have performance-based strategies, or profit sharing and performance-based strategies for their employees, but because people don't understand, so it tends not to drive them. They tend not to implement it. So how about implementing it and also explaining it to people so that they can understand, and use that to drive the performance of the people, use that to drive the performance of the company, and also use that to be able to implement your salary increase. Then adjusting work size and structural hiring freeze. So if you look at your current staff population, can you continue to afford, based on this minimum wage implementation, if you are only even implementing for the persons who are currently earning below minimum wage, can you actually, if you move them to minimum wage, can you actually afford it, and can you sustain pay on this grade level? So if that's not going to work, do you need to, if you do the minimum wage increase, do you need to freeze hiring for maybe a year or for a couple of months so that the company can actually adjust? Do you need to increase the workload of other persons on a particular grade level, on a certain grade level? And then do you need to adjust your workforce size? So you can use strategies like voluntary redundancy. You tell people for certain roles. But first, I think the best thing is to first identify what are your critical roles. You have to actually identify that. You have to do your workforce assessment and identify these are your critical roles in the organization. These are the roles you cannot do it. Then for the non-critical roles, or people in between, you can actually offer them voluntary redundancy packages, give them good, decent packages, and reduce your workforce size so that you can actually continue to afford to reward your employees based on their performance, and also grow your organization. And then you can choose to make certain roles temporary. You can choose to make certain roles part-time. And then even in your hiring going forward, you can actually choose to make those make certain roles ad hoc, so or temporary or part-time, so that you can actually reduce your total cost of employment or your wage bill. Then we talked about government and financial support, subsidies and grants. You can actually explore all these options. There are certain options for different industries that are available. Things like ITF are actually available across all the industries. You can take advantage of that to use that to implement training for your employees. Then you can also consider taking short-term loans or seeking financial assistance to bridge the gap temporarily. Now, in a situation like this, as an HR professional with a business perspective, for you to be able to advise your organization to take loans, to seek financial assistance, to bridge the gap, you have to be able to advise based on the fact that what can we afford going forward? What's the future looking like for us based on the economic situation, based on the industry that we actually operate in, based on the market? What can we actually afford going forward? Is there a possibility that we're not going to actually lose everything eventually? So before you do that, before you advise this, you actually have to do that check and be sure. All right, please can we go to the next slide? Okay, so possible negative impacts on the increase of minimum wage. So there are other aspects, there are other perspectives to the increase of the minimum wage. Well, everybody is not very optimistic about the fact that there's a minimum wage increase. Everybody is saying that, oh yes, with the minimum wage, cost of living is going to improve. With the minimum wage, poverty would actually improve in the country. We are going to reduce poverty. We are going to stimulate the economic growth. Well, but it's not everybody that actually sees from this perspective. So some people believe that there's going to be a lot of economic disruption and job losses. Minimum wage hikes can lead to job losses, particularly among low-skilled workers. If before I'm paying 30,000 naira for 6 persons, now I'm going to be paying 70,000 naira for that same 6 persons. Of course, my cost has increased. Am I going to be able to sustain it? I will look at it. I'm paying you people 70,000 naira. Can I reduce these 6 persons to 3 persons or 4 persons so that I can actually reduce my cost? So it can actually lead to job losses, particularly among low-skilled workers, as businesses respond by reducing their workforce and automating their tasks. So we're looking at the fact that AI is here to stay, and it keeps improving, and it keeps bringing us up to speed on so many aspects of our jobs and our industry. So are we going to look at using more softwares? Let me just go invest in using software than actually trying to hire 3 people to actually do the job. Then we're looking at inflation and cost of living. So minimum wage increases can lead to higher prices for goods and services, negating the intended benefits for low-income workers. The truth is that everybody believes that now minimum wage is now 70,000. The market woman wants to take advantage of that. The person you're going to the market to buy something from, everybody wants to take advantage of that. So there's that perspective that irrespective of the minimum wage, the minimum wage being increased, we're still going to actually still spend more eventually. Is it really going to impact inflation like we actually think it would? Then disproportionate impact on youth and minority workers. Minimum wage hikes can adversely impact specific demographic groups such as young and minority workers, who often have higher unemployment rates and lower work experience. So people who have low work experience, are we going to be able to hire them based on their low work experience? Are we going to be able to, looking at the fact that our minimum wage has increased, are we going to be able to put people in roles, people that would typically are able to offer the previous minimum wage, and still offer them jobs and still offer them opportunities? Are we going to still be able to do that or afford to do that anymore? So these people are going to get affected, and I believe that the unemployment rate is still going to increase based on this minimum wage increase, looking at the demand that it's going to have on companies. Then mixed results and unintended consequences. The new minimum wage in 2019 had mixed outcomes. While public sector's workers benefited from the wage increase, private sector employers struggled to comply. The research noted that some businesses were forced to downsize or close altogether, leading to reduced economic activity in specific sectors. I think that has been the major questions that we've been asking all this while. And a lot of people have been asking, which has to do with the fact that it's pretty easy for the public sector to implement this, but the private sector, everybody keeps asking, should we implement? Should we even bother? Should we even try? Now we're saying that the minimum wage increase applies to the private sector, but the question now is for the medium and small scale businesses, can they actually afford this? And can they sustain it? Looking at the economic situation in the company, we're going to have a lot of reactions. So for HR professionals that work in medium and small scale businesses where literally the profits is just being balanced gradually, how are we going to implement this minimum wage? So we're going to keep having mixed reactions, not just now, but I believe it's going to be something that we're going to deal with for another maybe 1 or 2 years before we actually regularize. So alternatives and solution. What are the alternatives to, we've talked about some of these things. What are the alternatives and solutions to actually implementing the minimum wage? So we're looking at skills training and education. So just like we have said that you should offer your employee, you should expand your benefits in kind, offer people more benefits. We're also saying that why not offer people more training? Why not look at investing in your people more, investing in the skills more, so that you can actually help workers grow in their roles, grow in what they are currently doing, and even look at giving them opportunities to also help other people below certain cadres to actually grow as well. Then wage subsidies, offsetting the cost of employing low wage workers for business. So you can actually offset the cost of employing low wage workers for business by actually working with other partners, working with third-party consultants to actually help you hire them so that you can actually, and also reduce the number of low wage workers for certain business. Then universal basic income, providing a regular unconditional sum of money to all citizens. Then targeted minimum wage adjustments, considering industry, regional, and demographic factors when setting minimum wages. Okay, so I think this is the most engaging part, so which is the frequently asked question by lots of people. I think I'll just take the first two, then I'll leave the rest to Mr. Demola to handle. So how do I propose the implementation of the new 70,000 minimum wage in my company, where over 93% earn more than 70,000? I think we've talked about that a lot. If over 93% earn more than 70,000, you don't have to implement. You don't have to implement. You can cascade your implementation. You can actually, you can cascade it for the next 6 months, 3 months, or 1 year. So you actually don't have to implement. Why not focus on those that are currently earning below the minimum wage? I don't know if Mr. Demola has anything to contribute, or Mr. Liemi, to that. Okay.
Yeah, sorry,
Then,
I have something to say if you don't mind.
yes.
Okay,
Go
for
on,
those
go on.
organizations, there's nothing wrong in having well-paid salary in different time period. I remember when we were in the bank, some banks used to pay like 2 times. You pay the junior staff maybe a particular day, and then you move the senior staff in on a particular day. So it's not usually like fixed in whatever way you want to fix, depending on the finances of the organization. Some few weeks ago, I got a mail from the financial controller of an organization telling me, oh, the salary before now was 15th of the subsequent month. So I have people at my background, I'm so sorry there. So 15th of the following month, that's the subsequent month. So, but what they've been able to do was just so, because I kept on like, you cannot employ people and pay them maybe 45 days after. That's what it means in relative terms. So why don't you just this is already showing us that your financial capacity is already threatened. So why don't you just do this, split it into two, maybe the lower level and the intermediate level get on a particular day. So, but he called me like 2 days ago, was like, oh, they've implemented it now. It's better for them. But with the new minimum wage, what they want to do was now have a third category, so knowing fully well that this is what they can, because they depend on deliverables from other organizations, receivables, and it doesn't come in regularly like the way they should get it. So simple logic is we can always differentiate things and have different days for salary payment. Thank you.
From youth, Dami, thank you so much for that contribution. I particularly like the fact that you highlighted the need not to necessarily place your entire wage bill on a particular day or on a particular cycle, so that you can play better within your cash flow. That is a very great contribution. I think Dorothy also has a comment or contribution. If you like to ask questions, please type them. Or if you like to ask, you can raise your hands. But we're also taking contributions and comments, how you intend to implement this minimum wage or based on experience. Dorothy, you have the floor, please.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the enlightening session thus far. I have a contribution, and it's that if we have found that the company cannot afford to keep some of these people, right, for a sustained period, I think one thing we can offer, rather than be quick to lay them off or something like that, what we can consider, one option we can explore is to have them transition, right, from full-time employees to maybe part-time roles. So have these people work for certain hours within the day, maybe maintain the current pay that you have for them. You can do that for, say, 3 months, so that they can also get other jobs to supplement their earnings. And when it's time for you to let them go, they have other sources of income, right? So it's not a big shock to them, right? So I think one thing we can do to ease the transition for them is to have them explore, just transition them from full-time employees to part-time employees, right? So that they have the opportunity to earn from other sources, and if they can continue that way. That's just what I wanted to add. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Okay, I think Rita Papala has something else to say. Your hand is raised again.
Okay, so yeah, I wanted to say something really, and I mean, I've been trying to play it at the back of my mind. You know, this thing we call moonlighting, where people play and have different jobs. If I have an employee and I'm throwing it open, and you've been working in an organization, let's say with me now, and we've been paying, if I'm not paying, I struggle with salary, whatever it is. And I ask people here randomly, you work 5 days in a week. If I told you, work 3 days in a week for me, I'm okay. How many people will do that? And I pay you for the 3 days. Go and look for a job elsewhere. Let's play it randomly. Will people be open to that? Is a suggestion. You know, I have friends here in US that work 4 days, 3 days in a week, and they are okay. They do other jobs. But how many of us will be open to it, be disposed to working 3 days in an organization? Because at the end of the day, it's creativity that's going to solve this issue of pay and increase in salary when organizations are struggling. But we're 94 here. We throw it to, let me remove myself. We throw it to open 93 of us remaining. If the organization calls you like, oh, hey, you know what, we're struggling with this. I want you to just work 3 days in a week. I'm going to pay you for that 3 days. Your salary could increase, could decrease based on my job evaluation of your job per se. So how many of us will be willing to do that? By raise of hand, let's see if we're really going to do that. Thank you.
Okay, so do we want to quickly respond to that in just 30 seconds? How many of us will be interested in?
Okay, so let me add to that, Danny. So what Madam Rita has said is similar to one of those things we talk about, the rise of the gig economy. So quite a number of people these days see that they could actually just have, multiple streams of income, or decide to take the lesser, instead of doing 40 hours a week, do it as, let's see, 8 times 3, 8 times about 24 plus hours, in a week, so that they can have the time to do other types of jobs and make more income for themselves. organizations can also adopt that approach, like she rightly said. As against just downsizing outrightly, right? Why don't you just reduce the number of hours that each employee has to contribute in a particular week, and then pay them the commensurate fee for the number of hours that they spend? That way, the employee can have more than one gig, knows that he's committed to it within a certain period, and he can get more jobs if he's trying to increase, their own income. For instance, I want more disposable income. So what do? Right? I offer my services as a contractor. I think that's the word. Offer my services as a contractor to whatever organization needs my skills in the workplace. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for that contribution. So I think it's more or less okay. People are raising their hands. Please, just as we're going as we keep going through the different questions, please keep raising your hands. But I think the truth is it's a very good idea, and we could also implement it in terms of work hours. So it's not even just about the days of the week. We could just look at the hours. However, I think the other question is how many companies are actually ready to implement that, and how many companies are willing to actually work across that implementation as well, and HR professionals as well. So because that would also require that we have a tool that's documenting the number of hours or the number of days people are actually working, and then the line managers also being able to carry them along to make sure that they are able to work with these individuals. We Nigerians have an interesting perspective to everything. Okay, so yes, Madam Rita, you have your hands raised again. So
sorry, let me bring it down now. Not at all. Not
Okay.
at all. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, Paul, do you have a contribution or question? Paul, Osatu,
Yeah.
quickly.
Observation, sir, or contribution. Thank you
Okay.
very much. When considering multiple job holding or moonlighting, we have to be very careful with that, because, or probably maybe we streamline those people that that you can maybe give that offers to, because if you give that option to most of your talented staff, there's probability that they get engaged somewhere else, that they will later leave your job, and probably maybe before you could replace them will cost you a lot of things, a lot of issues and the likes. But I would prefer that those people in that category that you want, maybe because of the financial capacity of the company, you don't want to lose them, you can put them in that category instead of making it open to every staff. Okay, will you prefer to be working for me for just 3 days, while the remaining 2 days you go and look somewhere else to work? I will suggest that it shouldn't be open for all staff. It should be limited to probably people that you think that, okay, you don't want to lay off. That's my own contribution.
All right. Thank you very much. Bukola, please, you can unmute your mic.
All right. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you, everyone, for the topic so far. I think mine is more of a question than contribution, because I'm here to learn. All right. And the question goes thus. I know of organizations that they review their salary. They have a form of performance appraiser on a 6-month basis. I know of another that has it on a yearly basis. So for organizations like this, I want to know what is going to be expected of them in such a time as this, when we have like a general upgrade in terms of the minimum wage that was just introduced. Because I feel like for organizations that have this as a trend from time to time, and they've been keeping up to it, either on 6-month basis, annually, and the like. So is it still necessary that, of course, I want to believe that maybe they may not even be having, employees that will be earning probably less than 70,000 as it were, but even if they do, what would you advise, like, for such organizations? That's my first
So let me
question.
quickly respond. Thank you so much, Bukola, for that question. Now, human beings are not just exclusively rational. We are also psychological. Okay, we are psychological. So we are psychoanalytical. Let me combine the two. Because if in the society, on a general note, everybody's everybody's income is increased, the wage earners, and then correspondingly in the marketplace, prices are going up. But because maybe every year you typically increase your own employee salary, except the increase is coinciding with the general mass increase, there's going to be this mental sense of we are missing out. Why? Everybody around them is getting an increase. So what I would suggest, if your organization can afford it, is do some increase. It doesn't have to be significant. So let's assume that normally your increase is like 10% or 15% or 20%. You can even do a 2.5% increase and say, hey guys, don't forget that we increased in January and we are contemplating increasing next January again. But take this 2.5% or this 5%, or you may pacify them to say, wait till January, we will increase it again. But because of that psychological perspective, you don't want them to feel left out, especially if you can afford it as an organization and your employees know you can afford it, then do something. At all. Bad. I think I really want to respond to a question. There was one question asked by Joy and Yao very early in the conversation. Adelele, are you ready to respond?
Yes, can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, yeah. So I'm trying to get the question. Okay, so it says focusing on critical roles is good, but the fear of getting other employees disengaged is also there. What do you advise we do? I think there was
More light
previous
on that
speaker,
question.
Paul.
Yes.
So
need more light,
Paul
that is-
Oketuyi.
Hello,
Go ahead,
Adelele.
sir.
Just to put more
Yes,
context.
sir, go ahead.
He asked that question when Demola was suggesting that in a situation where you cannot increase everybody's salary or increase everybody's salary proportionately, that you could, for example, identify your critical roles, maybe give them 50% more, and non-critical roles, maybe 20% more. That was the point where she asked that question, just to provide you with some context.
Okay, so to highlight that, right? With thing about critical roles is these are the guys that have more impact on the bottom line, right? And those are the guys that you likely want to keep more within the organization. So those are the guys you put more emphasis and more focus on. Those are the guys you want to give the immediate increase. You do the immediate increase for that very moment when you are doing the increase. For the non-critical roles, right? You can also have the performance impact, which is if you have an appraisal done, right? Look at the guys that have the 5/5s, then you increase their percentages by, let's assume you want to do a 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 ratio, for instance. You get 5/5, you get a 25% increase. You get 4/5, you get a 20% increase. And if you want to cap it at 3, do that, right? That way, they know that even though they know that they aren't critical, right, they still partake in the increase. That's one. The second step is what I mentioned before, that you don't also need to do the increase immediately. Communicate that you will do an increase and this is how the increases will be done. So that way, they look forward to it, and then there's that healthy competition within the organization. Like, performance is optimal. Everybody's performing because they know that they need to get a certain increase. And then when it's now due for you to implement the increase, then you implement that increase. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for that. Balajoko, you had your hand raised. Do you have something? Do you want to unmute?
Hello, good evening.
Hi,
Good
good
evening.
evening.
I wanted to share a personal experience. Last year when the first subsidy was removed, and my staff were, of course, talking about things, and January before then, we had done increments. In fact, we did a salary review, and we also did increments for six set of people. So
Hi, your audio is
obviously,
not clear. Is it possible you could maybe move closer to your mouth,
okay,
piece?
can you hear me? Because I'm actually very close to.
Okay, it's still
Hear me
it's still
clearly?
faint. Your
You
voice.
can remove the earpiece and speak directly to the phone.
Can you hear me now? I've done that already. Can you
Great,
hear me now?
great. Yes, we
Fantastic,
can.
fantastic.
Much better.
Okay, so what I did was, at the time when the subsidy was removed, of course, as a company, we had not made any sales. In fact, we'd not made any profit. So of course, I could not go back to the management to even mention to them about the complaint. So I just had to put everything on the table for the staff to understand and make them I played a scenario for everybody and I made them answer the questions and what the expectation and the result should look like. And yes, I managed to get everybody's buy-in that, okay, we'll patiently wait till this year, because in my place of work, we also do review on a yearly basis. You can be rest assured that our review comes yearly. So at that time, it was a lot of work because I had to keep explaining, I had to keep communicating, I had to keep pacifying people to explain and make them see reason. And in fact, I had for the staff that have stayed long, I had to make them recall that, okay, so this is the culture of the organization. So it's not like they don't know what is going on with as regarding the impact of this removal of a subsidy, but this is the situation of things. So when you find yourself in that kind of situation, I think one thing you can do is, if you've tried all options with the management, is just find a way to just pacify the employees and wait. And I hope that if you give them, if it is yearly, it is yearly, because this year we had to do review for some set of people. It didn't cut across everybody. Majorly the senior people had to wait a little bit, but we had to cater for the junior level people. So I just wanted to share my experience. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that feedback. Bukola, do you have something else you want to say, or just raising your hand from before? Hi, Bukola.
Okay, thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone. So my other questions are, firstly, you spoke about cascading, and I'm thinking that what ways can we avoid like shooting ourselves in the leg while cascading? Was it Ademola that spoke about the COLA method? I don't know, the CPI, right? And presently now he mentioned that we are about 32.67%, as at, is it July or June? Now, if you want to cascade to say, okay, we're going to be implementing this in the next so months, I'm sure that by then the average COLA or this CPI he calculated would have increased by then. And so I'm thinking in my head, if we are finding it like difficult right now to implement, an average, a current average that we have right now in our faces, how much more you planning for a future that you don't know what inflation is going to look like? So I don't know. I'm thinking that it's a bit tricky, sort of. So what would you advise in that aspect? So my other question is also for ad hoc staffs, part-time staff, so to say. Now, do you also advise that in one way or the other, either in cash or in kind, like you mentioned, how should we include, the ad hoc staff that work with us part-time? How should we just compensate them around this whole thing?
Okay, so for your last question, how do you compensate your ad hoc staff? So definitely you should be able to implement the minimum wage for them. They shouldn't earn more less than the minimum wage. However, you also, just like we've said, you can actually look at other strategies, and you can also look at how to implement performance into their pay. So there was a particular company that we designed a pay structure for. They work on it's a daily wage kind of thing, and so it's the number of days you show up that you actually earn for that particular month. So, and they were literally like ad hoc staff for us at that point in time. And what did we do? We made it be that if you work less than a certain number of days in a particular month, if you work a minimum of 28 days, there's a certain amount of money you get per day. But if you work less than that, if you work less than that defined number of days, there's a certain amount of money that you're actually going to earn. So it was more like trying to include performance into what you're actually doing for these employees at that point in time. Okay. Okay. All right. So it was more like you're actually you're actually implementing some form of performance for this particular employees at that point in time. So it's very important what really applies to your ad hoc staff. What are the benefits? What are the different things that you can actually apply to your ad hoc staff? All right. So then your first question is please can you go over your first question again?
All right, so I spoke about cascading.
Okay. Oh yes. Okay. So how do you cascade? And if you're currently struggling with the current CPI, average CPI, what are you going to do? Most times what happens is at the point where you are actually implementing, at the point where you're actually requesting for approval, it's what you submit for approval that you actually eventually implement for your employees. So at that point in time, if you were maybe implementing in July, or maybe you're implementing in September or something, what's the average at that point in time? And you already have a plan you submitted for approval. Sometimes if your company is, just like we keep saying, see, if CPI is too much for your company to implement, what is affordable for your company to implement? What is sustainable? So if that figure, that current CPI, average CPI, if that's what you can actually afford and sustain, you can go ahead with it at that point in time. There are no hard rules to these things. So identify what your company can afford. Don't try to shoot yourself in the leg. And then in terms of cascading as well, just like we said, if your company has if your company can what's it called, cascade for the next 3 months, 6 months, what we've emphasized here is to say transparency to your employees. And you also have to look at what you can afford. Maybe there's a particular deal that your company is working on, and then a particular inflow that they're expecting at a particular time that's really going to help the company and is going to be progressive for the company. Yeah, you can actually do that. And even if it is another 1 year, but transparency to your employees will be very, very critical and very important. All right. Is that good enough, or do you have further questions? Okay, so let me move on to Victoria. Yes, sir?
Yes, I just want to also say that quickly, we should also enable our employees earn money from the organization. What do I mean? For example, you can say for every new business they bring, they get 5%, 1%, 2.5% of every new deal, so that they know that in addition to whatever they are doing for the company, depending on the revenue stream of the organization, if they can do some business development activities and it crystallizes, they get something, so that we are expanding their capacity to earn income. Victoria, please. Victoria Biwo.
Good evening. Good evening. Please confirm you can hear me.
Please go ahead. Please proceed with your contribution.
Thank you. Oh, thank you. There is a wonderful presentation and it's timely. I appreciate the facilitator. And thank you, sir. Well, my own contribution is to share the experience I personally have in one of the companies I work with when we had this issue of inflation. What the company also was affected in terms of their productivity, the sales. The sales was not like this, not to talk of to accommodate an increase, but the COLA system had to be implemented because of inflation. because what the staff were earning could not take them home, especially the junior staff. So what actually happened was they had to have a criteria that those who have joined the organization for so years, this is what will be. And they implemented the issue of different letter aside the, what did they call it? Aside the offer letter, stating 15% increment of your basic, 15% increment of your basic, but this is just tentatively. There was no, there's only a start date, but it was not something like it's an addition to your salary. So when the company could not sustain that, they practiced for about 6 months and they could not sustain it anymore, a communication was also made. This letter that was issued was reviewed by a lawyer. So in any implementation that we are taking, you need to carry your legal team along. You need to be extremely careful. So an employee will not come back tomorrow and say, this is what you told us, this is what you communicated. That's one. The second one is that there's a practical example of the graphic guys. The team, we have graphic team, in which we have to carry out job analysis. That, okay, how long can the social team, the media team, how long do we engage you? We don't advertise like that, or we're always on the website. Okay, let's do it as a part-time, as someone has recommended, and said, okay, so give us 5 hours of your time on a weekly basis, and the negotiation was reviewed, and they were glad, so they can have time for other things. So if we're able to carry out job analysis to find out what roles that is not all that key to the business. Another one is, what role can you outsource? Instead of keeping someone 100% on your payroll, there's some role you can outsource that will actually help reduce costs. So that's my contribution. Thank you.
Okay.
So much.
Thank you very much.
We take Madam Rita.
Okay, so thank you very much to everyone down there, Mr. Josh in particular. My own contribution is actually in line with what you just said as per letting them be a partner in the business. I remember when I started my consulting company, I used to have a large staff turnover, a high staff turnover, and then it was more of I was begging to stay afloat. I was begging to let me have reasonable staff or staff with high quality in terms of skills, knowledge, and things, and then not having them leave after 6 months and things like that. So what I did eventually was just what you said. When I'm bringing in anybody on board into Beacon Gate, I said to them, I cannot afford what other consulting companies are paying you, because we deal with clients and clients don't usually pay you immediately. Even if you do recruitment, you do training, you do outsourcing, it's always graded for projects. They either tell you that once you achieve this milestone, you get a certain percentage. So we didn't have a stable income. So what I told them was, number one, engagement, which is very critical. We started having engagement with them. So the number 2 thing I did was that this is what you can collect. You will earn as much as you don't even know your salary. I'll take my eyes away from what you earn. Bring businesses in. When you bring businesses in, when you handle projects, you also get a certain percentage. It is not, you don't need to beg for it. You just see it in your account. So I made it in such a way that it was stable. So this month, you know what you will get in terms of your flat salary, but as high as you want to jump depends on you. So you get to get what you think you want to get. If you deploy all your energy to getting new businesses in, you can go as high as any maximum stretch that you can imagine. Honestly, I close my eyes to it. I don't want to know it. So if people can deploy that, I think it can also help in terms of business sustainability and not putting everybody on the pressure to arrive and do this minimum wage for across board for everybody. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you very much. Mr. Derele, do you have any closing remarks?
Okay, so for me, closing remarks is basically something that I thought of that with the new implementation of the minimum wage, we should expect some new financial implications in terms of taxation and whatnot that might end up affecting the whole calculation later. Because as at the time the 2019 law was implemented, that was when the Finance Act 2020 also came out that affected how CRA was calculated and whatnot. So That's going to be most likely one of the offshoots of this new minimum wage. So payroll specialists, compensation and benefit specialists should also just be ready. Don't just limit yourself to just what the HR space is about. If you have tax consultants as friends, finance consultants as friends, you may need to always check in with them regularly, because once those acts are out, right, it will affect the payroll one way or the other. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So in summary, we've learned a lot, and we've had several conversations today. Thank you very much for to everyone that has contributed. But in summary, the emphasis right now is on us being able to identify what our companies can afford. It is very critical. It is very important. You need to do a wage bill analysis. What is your current wage bill, and what would your wage bill look like when you actually implement whatever strategy or whatever method you are actually going to be implementing, whether it's a flat percentage increase, whether it's the CPI you want to make use of, whether it's just a random figure you want to make use of, or whether you just want to focus on the employees that are below the minimum wage. You just want to do an increase, whether you want to cascade it over the next couple of months or the next couple of years. Really, the main emphasis is on affordability, being able to do what your company can afford and what would help your company to actually grow in revenue, because the focus is, as HR professionals, is not just for the employees, but is equally also for the company. You have to be able to look at both your employees and the company equally, and also being able to look at what you can sustain. Look at your figures, work with your finance team, like Mr. Derele has said, work closely with them, identify what's the income for the company, or what the revenue for the company has been for the last 2 to 3 years, and check all of these things, and make sure you have all your figures right, and speak with your management. I believe that that's a very good place for us to draw the curtain. All right, so Mr. Liam, over to you, sir.
All right, thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. A few additional comments as we wrap up. First, let me respond to 1 or 2 questions on the chat. Someone is asking, when is the minimum wage taking effect? I would technically say that it has taken effect. The reason is that the former minimum wage has expired. Are we together? And we know the minimum wage right now is 70,000 naira. Again, if you have people working in your firm, your full-time employees, and they are earning below minimum wage, you are aware that there are protests ongoing. Don't wait for a protest to break out in your firm or between your workers. Please, especially people below the minimum wage, bring them up immediately. You should even wonder how they've been surviving before now. Okay. Again, let me also say here, part of the fallout of tonight's conversation is, in some instances, there may be need for certain hard conversations. Please don't be shy to bring them up. Let me also say this quickly. Don't wait for your MD or your management or your board to approach you on this minimum wage. Initiate a meeting, a conversation with them. In your next management meeting, provide some insights from some general overview and ideas. And that's one of the reasons why we took the time and the pain to have this webinar tonight. I am fully aware that we don't have all the pictures complete, but we cannot wait till we have all the puzzles in place to take action. So initiate conversation with your management and engage with your CFO, your finance team, so that you can both simulate different options, option 1, 2, 3, based on what your organization can afford. Sustainability is the key. Each time you hear us in Complement talking about affordability, we are talking about sustainability, so that you don't pay for the first 2 to 3 months and then you go under in month 4 or thereafter. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank all the members of the panel. First and foremost, I would like to thank Deborah Damilola Obedero. I would also like to thank Ademola Awutuishe. We also have some adjunct faculty member for tonight's session, Aderele Amosu, my own very special guy. And let me also thank generally members of the HR mentorship community who at various times provided some perspectives and some of their reflections on these thoughts, some of which we also harvested and put into consideration as we are preparing for this. My name remains Oluyemi Adeosun. It has been a privilege doing this together tonight. I'd like to thank all the 100 people plus that joined tonight's session. I'd also like to apologize to those who couldn't join. Please watch the YouTube channel tonight, Oluyemi Adeosun on YouTube. It's my name, so you can't forget it. Just go to YouTube, type in Oluyemi Adeosun. Ladies and gentlemen, what a night, what a session, what a tremendous audience. Thank you so much and good night.